Hello, data leaders. This is Les Muller. This is the Data Leaders podcast, and I am your host. And today on the show, I have Johan Thorell. Johan will be speaking at our Data Leaders Transformation Roundtable in March 2018. And Johan is the Senior Director of Compliance and Data Privacy at Carlson Wagonlit Travel. Johan, welcome on the show.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here, Johan. And for those audience members who don't know you yet, can you just tell us a bit more about your background and where you're coming from in terms of your data journey?
Sure, happy to. So maybe it's a bit of a accident, actually, that I started work with data privacy. So professionally, I trained as a lawyer. I have a law degree from Sweden, where I grew up. And then I quickly, I don't know why, but I left Sweden straight after, did another law degree in Australia, stayed in Australia for a while, and then ended up here in London. And I worked with a set of different compliance issues in various organizations, from the fashion industry to financial services, and now with Carlson Wagonlit Travel, so in the travel industry. In fact, I wasn't intended when I started here to work with data privacy, but there were a couple of events here that meant that they were short of staff, and they asked me to take on data privacy. So here I am 3.5 years later doing data privacy of course, on top of other general compliance matters.
Lucky turn of events. And originally, what really compelled you to step on this path and go down the data route, so to say?
Well, I am, as a person, always exploring new things, new avenues, new knowledge. So when opportunities are given, and I think Richard Branson has said that, if you're given an opportunity, say yes, even if you don't know all the answers. And so I very much do that. If someone gives me an opportunity, I'll grab it and I run with it. So in this particular case, I started off working with data privacy as one of my colleagues left the organization, and there was a short period of time where we didn't have dedicated staff, and they naturally came to me and asked if with my experience, if I was happy to help out, and surely I did take up that opportunity.
Yeah, sounds like a very healthy approach in this day and age. And you will be speaking on a very interesting topic. So this will be a small roundtable for 30 senior professionals working in all kinds of data-related functions. And you will cover quite an interesting niche. So you will talk about solving the tension between business aspirations and data regulations. I mean, why did you use and choose this particular topic?
Well, I think, and this is my experience from working as a compliance officer in various different organizations and industries, is that whilst in this particular case, we're talking about data regulations, so we probably all know that in Europe, we will have new harmonized EU regulation coming into force in May. And a lot of pressure on what that means and what organizations need to do to be compliant. Yet we have a business that really wants to use data in a totally different way now than even 3-5 years ago. They see data being an integral part of the value proposition for the organization going forward, and in fact, possibly critical for the organization to survive. And using data typically means, if you want to provide new services, that you use personal information, which is covered by the new EU regulation. Well, we all know we do have regulation in place today, but this is a harmonized and more beefed up regulation, if you like. And so when you will naturally get tension between the business wanting to drive maybe very fast these new ideas through and deliver new products and services to their clients, or individual customers or other organizations. And at the same time, you have people like myself having sort of be the sentinel, if you like, around the data privacy side, and having to also operate slightly perhaps independently from the business and give advice on what can possibly be done and what perhaps cannot be done under the regulation. Now that creates tension naturally. And whether or not, in this case, of course, we're talking about data privacy, but it's applicable to any such tension driven by regulatory change and or change in the way the business operates. So, the regulation can be static and there's a massive change in the business drivers, or you have a change both ways. And I would argue today we see a change both ways. We see it in regulation as we see it in the way the business want to use personal information going forward and even today. So how do you resolve that tension? Well, the best way to do that is to have in place, in my view, a good framework, a governance framework that sets out the way you would deal with issues as they come up and very clearly articulate how the organization would like to deal with those issues and the risks that are associated with them. So that's why I think it's an interesting topic to have a conversation around at the meeting.
Absolutely, and it's a very hot topic in general, data regulations in the data leaders community, and people are also very interested in the governance framework. So I think bringing these together, it will be a very unique and I think a useful amalgamation of those different areas. And so obviously the new data regulations, GDPR and e-privacy, we can be prepared, but it will be new for everyone. I think that you would be an individual who's as prepared as one can be. So I'm sure there are some real life experiences that you will draw inspiration from while building and leading your session. I mean, what were some of the major projects around which you build the content?
So again, building on experience from the different set of industries, the different scenarios, again, it's not necessarily related to data privacy, it's related to change. So change is perhaps the key driver here. Yes, there are unique technical requirements in the regulation that sort of the subject matter experts like myself would provide and bring to the table. You have the business drivers, but it's that change, right? That how do you deal with that rapid change to allow your organization to be as agile as possible, to be as risk adverse or as possible, or perhaps, what is their risk appetite and match that to the specific matter at hand. So I will look at my experience driving large IT deliverable, big, large projects for former employers dealing with a change in regulation and how we use that change and a governance framework around that change to drive a successful implementation of the necessary IT tools to allow the business to continue to be successful, to continue to be agile, to enable the business to take the right risk decisions, and yet meeting the regulatory requirements and being able to articulate that and evidence that to the regulators. So there will be past and present experiences I will draw upon.
Fantastic. And, change management and business transformation are very important topics, but they're also quite wide. So at your previous organizations and also now at Carlson, I mean, while leading those transformations and navigating through those complexities, I mean, on a practical level, what were your main challenges along your journey?
So I think, when you look at a governance structure, I think a lot of leaders would look at it as red tape, bureaucratic, cumbersome. Why are we talking about a governance framework has nothing to do with the issue? So getting at the sort of the sell this idea to the individual stakeholders and showing the value add that the governance structure brings along, I think is important. And maybe, you can look at an analogy, you build a house, right? You've got you've got some drawings in place, right? Normally, you could, of course, go down and say, well, I want to build a house. And so, well, wouldn't it be good to have an architect first? And so I have something, a framework in place here, right? And you can say, no, why should I do that? It's architect is expensive. What value do I get out of that? I mean, I have the builders here on site. Let's just start building and see where we go. Well, you can do that, but as you build, you probably realize this is far more complex and far more expensive than bring along an architect with a blueprint, with a change management process in place. And yes, you do need to invest upfront, but at the end result is probably going to be there much faster and with a smaller price tag attached.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, I really like this analogy with building a house. I think, yeah, indeed, those processes are very similar. And so what do you think? So in terms of developing those systems and processes, what were those strategies and techniques, and also maybe a personal mindset that really allowed you to deliver consistent results?
I think what have helped me is I'm a good listener, right? So you need to understand really what the business drivers are. I'm here in my capacity, previous professional roles I've had, as well as now to be an advisor. I'm not making the decision, but I'm providing valuable input to the process. And to enable me to provide that input, I do need to be a good listener. And the second part, I think, is to be a problem solver. Now, you may not, in the end, solve all the problems a project might bring along or an operational issue, but understanding the issue, listen to what the stakeholders are trying to resolve, and then come up with a pragmatic and practical solution to that issue certainly shows that value add to the business, and hence, they keep you on as an advisor. They see it valuable to keep you as the architect, if you like, on the project.
Wonderful. And evidently you went about it the right way. But if you had a clean slate, if you had to maybe start all over again, what would you do to further improve on those results, or maybe even to accelerate the process? Is there anything else that you would prioritize, or any other areas that may not be your natural strengths, like, for example, being a good listener, but you think that they would have been useful?
Well, there's obviously the way you influence, right? And having access to key stakeholders. Sometimes that can be very difficult in large and complex organizations where decisions may be made, far away from where you're at, and you are not able to communicate your message through your channels appropriately. So I guess if I were able to change something, it would be to make sure that not just myself, but other advisors have access to the decision makers and not through intermediaries, because that could, it has proven to sometimes change the message. It gets lost in translation. And as we know, there are different drivers, different drivers within the business, which may be added or as an overlay on your drivers, which again might mute your message or shift it. So I would prefer to have access directly to the decision makers, but we know we all work in a type of a matrix. We are just one cog in the wheel, if you like, and it's not always we can get to that decision maker ourselves. So always be very clear with the communication, and sometimes that let me down, but you learn and you improve on your mistakes.
Indeed. And this is these are very useful insights. So to strive to maintain that direct channel of communication and being clear and open and concise, all of those are indeed key. And so in terms of your actual session, I think you already mentioned some of those areas that you will touch on, but can you just run us through again what your session will cover, and maybe shine a light on the main focus areas and the takeaways?
Yeah, so what I aim to do is, and I like that to be more of a conversation than, if you like, a presentation. It's much more meaningful for everyone if everyone share ideas or thoughts or questions to drive the conversation forward. But it is really to look at that tension between your business and your regulatory requirement, and where they typically do not match up, right? So that tension, and how the governance framework can help to facilitate a quick and decisive resolution to that tension. All tension will not always, and I've never seen an organization where there's not some tension, but it certainly helps. It brings clarity, and it also helps to bring certainty into the process. And I think that's what I want to focus on, and how you can use those frameworks to help you be more successful, whether it's on a project or if it's just in your normal operations of your business, day-to-day activities, where having that framework will definitely assist.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think that the format will definitely help, because as you pointed out, I think it should be more of a conversation than just a presentation. That's why we keep it so intimate. That's why we work with a low number of attendees, and everyone is a practitioner coming from a respected organization. Now, in this case, who do you think that in the audience would benefit most from these ideas? So you will have a wide audience, people working in all kinds of different data-related functions, but do you think there is a specific group that might benefit even more than others?
Well, I'm not sure. I think it would benefit everyone to have a good understanding about governance, because hopefully most of us would have come across that in one shape or form in our working life, right? And sometimes we see it as I mentioned earlier, red tape. Just why do I need to do this? Why do I need to fill out this documentation? Why do we need to get this approval? But understanding the reason behind it, you can obviously always challenge a framework. It's not static, right? It can change, but having it in place and creating that certainty, it will help everyone to understand why it's in place. It may help some professional a bit more than others. If you're a program manager or project manager, it's usually your role to be if you like, the director of the orchestra. You are not playing, you need everyone else to play the tunes, but you are leading it, right? So you are all coordinating the orchestra. So I think for them, it might be perhaps a little bit more helpful than the individual, player in the orchestra, but it will benefit everyone to have a good understanding of the governance process or the framework.
Fantastic. I like that analogy as well. Now we borrowed, some images from architecture, but now also from music. So it sounds great. And so this session will be quite interactive. How do you think that the audience members will be able to put the learnings into practice when they go back to their businesses?
So I aim to bring some sort of, if you like, tips that they can take away. Some maybe areas where they can go and do some further research, reading some really good papers and even books on the topic. But I don't expect everyone to have the time to do too much research. So there'll be a couple of tips provided, as well as easy way, and it's about enable you to maybe influence the decisions around making sure you have the right framework in place. Hopefully most organizations have some sort of governance framework, but maybe, as I said, it's not set in stone. And sometimes you get set in your ways, and you need a fresh approach to make it a bit more suitable for your organization. We all know everyone changed. 20 years ago, Amazon didn't exist, right? And so today, they're one of the largest companies in the world, right? So our organization also evolves, and the framework has to evolve as well. So I think that some hints and tips on what to do with the framework will be provided. That's my aim. Great.
And obviously you will, unpack this on the actual session in March. But for now, if you had to capture, only one idea that you would want the audience to walk away with, what would that be?
I would say, all right, I assume you have a framework in place. Do have a really robust change management plan. We know all projects or operations do change, even when you set the intent for that project. The change management process involved in that is sometimes highly critical. And if you haven't thought through that properly upfront and have all the stakeholders to agree, then you will find it very challenging then to deliver the project on time and on budget.
Fantastic. And on the roundtable, so we will have other sessions as well. Yours will be one of 6. And naturally in the group, because you will have 30, 35 professionals, very interesting conversations tend to emerge around future technologies and trends as well. I mean, is there maybe a trend or technology that you are personally passionate about today?
Well, I think if you look at the media today, what tends to excite people is all around different types of entertainments, right? If it's social media or is it new type of platforms, we can do all sorts of interesting things in our spare time. For me, personally, it's the ability to use technology for advancement of science, and particularly medical science. I find that extremely interesting, what medicine would look like in the future. Even in 10 years' time, I think there will be huge differences.
Yes, and is that because that is also somewhat an area of passion of mine. So do you use technology today to improve your health, like, for example, wearables, or is it more on a professional level for you?
Well, I think you touched upon a very interesting topic, right? So working with data privacy makes me slightly paranoid. Yeah, you have, I would see in the future, we would be able to track through wearables, not the type we see today, but basically your clothes. From the day you're born to the day you die, constant monitoring of your health and be able to prevent any major issues that you might otherwise have caused you an early death or early severe disability or a major impact on your health. We would be able to track that, and we'd be able to tell exactly what to do, and the whole society will benefit from it. I certainly believe that will happen. The issue then is privacy. How do you ensure that this data is not used in the wrong way, and who decides what is right and wrong? And so for any privacy professional, I think there will be plenty of work to be done going forward in this space, right? Finding the right, if it's an ethical question, a dilemma, moral, or even a legal dilemma.
No, this is a very interesting question, because we are, literally talking about human lives. I mean, how do you see that tension being solved? I mean, obviously, I ask you as a professional who has an in-depth understanding of the underlying processes in terms of how regulations tend to influence both business processes, but that always trickles down, into personal lives. I mean, how do you see, I know it's a difficult question, but how do you see that tension being solved?
Well, I think there will always be a tension, right? There will be commercial interest. I can see as the insurance industry, for instance, personally, my personal opinion is the insurance industry would be very interested to know and have access to stream data about people's health. Right? You can say, well, there's a benefit for those who are healthy. They will be basically, maybe the insurance is free. And those who are active, sports or keeping themselves fit will benefit. And then as people perhaps gradually less fit, then maybe they start to pay a premium. So you can see there might be a financial, carrot and stick there. But then the question is, what do they do with the information? Who will be excluded from having an insurance because they have a genetic disorder maybe that is not yet been resolved by science? And so there will always be those excluded groups. So you have to be very mindful about then that from a regulatory perspective, But also, I think from an ethical perspective, if you work with ethics within a company, say, well, should we, even if we could make money out of this, should we really use the information that way? So there'll be lots of discussions, I would imagine, amongst all sorts of companies who want to be part of sort of sharing that pie of opportunities around whether or not it's wearables for medical reasons.
Now, this is very interesting because in the data leaders community, we have quite a few medical devices and pharmaceutical companies as well who are now involved with connected services, biometrics. I know that this is a very hot topic. I would have an interesting question for you because you do have a global experience. In terms of geographies, how do you think that would kind of unfold? Do you see a friction in terms of how these technologies, emerge and continue to develop in different geographies? So I imagine that, how it will look like in Asia or in Europe or in the US will be quite different. Do you have any observations on that?
Well, I think we have a couple of cases already with those current wearables devices today where the entity providing these, so that the legal entity is operating out of the US, selling these devices worldwide, and have applied. And there will be a change with the new regulation in the EU, but up until recently, at least, they were operating under the US privacy regime, and that's quite different from the European. And so, as a consumer, maybe in Europe, you may buy a device, but may not necessarily understand. We know, I think we all guilty of this when we go online and buy something, click, agree on the terms and conditions. We don't bother reading them. And if we read them, we might not buy it, right? If we fully understand what we get ourselves into. So there's obviously a trade-off between, well, I get something that is beneficial to myself, but maybe I'm not paying the full price for the device. So part of the price is to give up some of my data, my personal information, to this company and maybe regulate it elsewhere. And maybe I don't have the same right as if I bought it from an entity that is located in my country. Maybe not. We know there will be changes going forward. But again, because I can't see we're having global regulation anytime soon on this topic, we will always have that tension, between commercial interest, personal interest, and also as a society, what a particular country believes is the appropriate use of personal information.
Well, thankfully, we have professionals like you who built up, strong experience in the field. So, hopefully you will equip us as a society with, the right techniques and tools to actually solve those tensions effectively. So, Johan, we are very much looking forward to your session in March, and I think I can speak for our community members and our attendees as well. Do you have anything else that you would like to add in terms of your particular session, or would you, leave the rest of the conversation about your topic for March?
Well, I would say anyone who's interested in the governance piece should really attend and hopefully provide their own input into that conversation. And I think we are, the more we can share about experience, the better we are all off in terms of providing them the right input to our own organization. And every organization is different path in terms of the digital sort of future or the digital now and risk appetite and so forth. But the governance framework as a principle should fit all organizations.
Great. I think then the format will be more than suitable because that's exactly what we aim to facilitate. So, real open, honest conversations, everyone sharing their insights and experiences, both in terms of their successes and also the difficulties that they had to overcome. So, yeah, I think it will be a great session. And now we reached a point in the interview where I usually ask our guests some questions that are not necessarily that closely related to either your topic or even the data profession in general. And this is the quick fire round. You are probably familiar with it. Basically, it will be a short list of questions, and you would have around 30 seconds to give me a convincing and impressive answer. So whenever you're ready, Johan, I'm ready to shoot the first question.
Go ahead.
Wonderful. So the first question is, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
I think it must have been whilst working in Australia as a consultant and walking into a client reception area, and I asked to speak to the client, and my boss who was with me said, smile. We smile, we don't smile enough. I think as individuals, if you smile, you create a different atmosphere with the other human being in the room. It's more relaxed. It's much easier to resolve problems. And so even if you might go into a very difficult conversation, if you start off with a smile, I think you're better off.
That is great advice. And yeah, I actually read a very interesting article about this just a couple of days ago. And it's true that it drastically changes the dynamic of the social interactions, but apparently it affects the individual's psychology as well through physiological pathways. So apparently it's kind of impossible to feel really sad and depressed when one is actively smiling. So the article suggested that whenever you feel down, you can just force yourself to smile or even laugh, and that will change the whole outlook of your internal perspective. So it's a very good advice. And the next question is, what is your most influential book and why?
I'm afraid I don't have much time today to read, but if I think about it, I read a lot as a teenager, and I read quite heavy books. But one that I was that did catch my mind was a book by Joseph Joffo, A Bag of Marbles. It's an autobiography about Joseph, who was trapped in France he was a Jewish young boy at the time, and obviously had to go through the horrific experience of the Nazi regime. And it tells a story about him being able to flee from France that was occupied to the free France, if you like, the Vichy regime. And it tells that story. And I think, being such young and finding ways of surviving was very, very touching. And clearly, I still remember it. It's a long time ago I read it, but it was a very, very interesting book.
Now, I'll definitely include a link in the show notes. And it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because actually quite a few guests usually mention the book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. But I've never heard of this one, but I'll make sure to check it out. And are there any particular takeaways that you actually apply in your life from that book? Because you mentioned that you still remember it, and it's really about a boy's journey and kind of navigating through adverse conditions. I mean, do you use any takeaways from that book that you find to be beneficial in your life?
Well, I don't think at the age of 14 I analyzed it quite that way, but clearly it did strike a chord with me, and so maybe it is, in adversity, don't give up, right? You find a way through, and I always found a way to where I want to be, right? So even if the goalposts are changing slightly, it's part of the journey. It's not always a straight line, and it's okay not to be a straight line. And just enjoy that journey, and you'll get to where you want to be. So maybe to some extent I've taken that on board.
Wonderful. And that kind of reminds me of a quote from Winston Churchill. I think he said, when you're going through hell, keep going. And that kind of brings me to my next question, because my next question would be that who is your most inspirational public figure? It can be someone who's alive right now, or someone who passed away, and why?
So as I grew up in Sweden, I was lucky enough to have nature on my doorstep. So we were as kids roaming around in the forests, around lakes. It's really a great way of appreciating nature, and actually the impact it has, positive impact it has on us as human beings. And so I think one person, luckily he's still alive, that I think have brought a great awareness of what nature does to humans through films and television is Sir David Attenborough. I hope he's still around for a while longer. I do certainly listen in on the latest documentary on BBC at the time, the Blue Planet 2. But I must say also, maybe as a one more person here that I find very inspirational and really interesting to listen to. And again, a scientist who I think a lot of us have seen and heard is a UK professor in physics, Brian Cox, who I find it's also very inspirational. And it's a slightly boyish kind of attitude and very entertaining. And even if it's a very serious matter, it's relatively easy to absorb. So I do enjoy his talks and his shows as well.
I'm happy to hear that we are a fellow fan. So yeah, for me as well, Planet Earth, and also the new series Planet Earth 2, one of my all-time favorite shows. Is just truly fascinating, amazing. I think it's a great achievement. And we will actually, ironically, we will have someone in March coming from BBC as well on the session. So yeah, someone who's heading up their business intelligence unit. So maybe he will be able to introduce you guys with David Attenborough. So very interesting. And the next question would be, what is your favorite quote and how do you put it into practice?
Well, maybe it's a bit cliche, but I think, carpe diem says quite a bit, right? You try to be in the present. I know it's very hard sometimes for us to think about the future and all the problems professionally or personally we might face, or the past that will influence the way who we are today. But being grounded in the present and take on board everything that we can. And being, as I said previously, a very curious individual, I always like to take all the opportunities I have in the day to learn more and to grow as an individual.
Fantastic. And the last question that I think we will finish on is, what advice would you give to aspiring data leaders today?
Well, I think to anyone, I think it's important to be true to yourself. Don't try to be someone else because that's what you think the people around you want you to be. At the end, that's not going to be very helpful for your own career or yourself. So be yourself, trust yourself, and I think don't be afraid to ask questions. Even at being around for a long time, we all sometimes get bogged down into the very minute details we are working in, and we think that everyone else understands what we're talking about, and sometimes we find ourselves in a position we think we understand what they're talking about, but we're a little bit too afraid to ask questions because we might look dumb. I think it's perfectly fine to ask any questions at any point in time, and so that will be my advice to those young new starters.
I think those are beautiful ideas, and I think it's a great note to finish on as well. And Johan, it was great to have you on the show. I think we covered a lot of ground. We talked about data regulations, governance frameworks, but also new technologies like MedTech. We spent some time in nature as well and with inspirational people. So thank you for the great conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to leave the audience with, or would you like to kind of continue the conversation in March at the roundtable?
No, I certainly look forward to meet everyone in March. It'll be I think, an interesting day, sharing experiences and ideas. across 6 different topics. And definitely look forward meeting you all and get to know you a bit better.
Well, likewise, and we look forward to having you. And then, Johan, if we don't speak until then, well, I look forward to meeting in person here in London in March.
Oh, thank you. Same.